Just for the record, Chair, and for the public and for everybody in this House, and with all due respects, I want to reiterate the point I made. Deputy Stanley arrived late, and I had my hand up from early, but you took him before me. Now, I get it that there's a pecking order in this system in terms of the size of your party. But I think men in this House should get it, that there is sexism in politics, and it may be sort of subconscious, but it does exist. And where you have a situation where you've got one woman ready to speak in a committee where everybody else is a man, you should at least take that into consideration. And I say that with all respect to everybody in this House, and I wanted to go on the record that I see this going on repeatedly. Now, having said that, I want to say to the Minister, look, it's all over the media that this is a Hames, that this is in chaos, that the National Broadband Plan has received a major blow. And I understand you, and you're doing a very robust defence of self and your office and your officials and the whole project, and I understand why you would do that. But I think at some point one has to admit that when it is clear that the National Broadband Plan is now going to cost us possibly up to 60% more than it originally did when it was rolled out a year ago, one has to admit that there is something terribly wrong, something is rotten in the state of Denmark. Now, it's very clear to me, as somebody who watches how companies operate, and all of us do because we live in a society that's dominated for everything you do, whether it's a house building or building a swimming pool or a school or walking down the road and seeing who's fixing the pipes or the tarmac haddon, it's all been done by private companies. Everything in this state has been privatised. And I think that goes to the heart of what is wrong here. Because you do an eloquent job of comparing the National Broadband Plan to the rollout of the electrification programme in this country. And I quote you, "Just as by building Ardnacrusha nearly 90 years ago, electricity unlocked the potential of a young country and ensured its survival, broadband will unlock our potential today as Europe's youngest population." And you know, all that sounds lovely. The problem is, though, when we electrified the country, we owned the ESB. The state owned the ESB. It wasn't putting up with the competitive, chaotic nature of a market that makes its decisions to either possibly, I don't know if Air threatened some kind of a potential litigation against the state if it didn't get access to those 300,000 premises in towns and villages because it was doing it anyway. I don't know. We may find out someday. But the point is that they were given access to those 300 premises in towns and villages to lay the cables, and nobody really cares about the boreens and the bogs and the faraway bits that come after that. Only the state. Only the body politic and the state really cares about that. Nobody in the market, and I'm listening to you all arguing about this company and that company, they're not going to make profit out of going up boreens and down hills or up hills and down dales unless we heavily subsidise them. And that's what we're about to do. The taxpayer is about to heavily subsidise them to the tune of 60% more than it cost us last year. And last year, when this was rolled out, I said to you, Minister, in the committee, that if we were to go down the model of what happened in Ardnacrusha and the electrification of Ireland, brilliant, it'll work lovely, because it's in the state's interest, it's in the people's interest, it's taxpayers' money, and we'll control it. If we go down this model and compare broadband to electrification, half the country will be left in the dark, and that is what's happening. Half the country are being left in the dark. You use the analogies of roads, I use the analogy of light. And half the country are being left in the dark because there isn't enough profit in it for any of these guys out there. And they're just not going to be interested, and hence your reluctance and the reluctance of your officials and anybody else to give a deadline, because you can't predict what the market is going to do. It is a bag of chaos, and it doesn't deliver for public services. And I just want to finish by saying, you know, this goes to the heart of it, and it's majorly ironic that Fianna Fáil will stand here and challenge you in the way that they do when it was them who privatised telecom. Telecom that was passed around, like, as Fintan O'Toole said, like a joint at a student party, from this one, that one, kicked around the marketplace, and now it is in the position that it's in. We owned telecom, we got rid of telecom, and now we're a state that's trying to do something unbelievably important. It is really important that everybody in this country gets access to broadband so that they can work, so they can do business, so that they can learn, so that they can be in communication. It is so important to us that now we're relying on a chaotic market to deliver it, unlike electricity in the 50s and 60s that we could deliver ourselves. And so Fianna Fáil have a huge amount of responsibility for this. They privatised a state-owned company that was doing very well. Thank you very much. At least we may have a chance, we may have had a chance of getting the ESB, which is part-owned by the state, to do something about this, but now they tragically have pulled out too. And of all the deals from past private-public partnerships or public-private partnerships, this has to be the worst. Because, at least in most of the past deals with public-private partnerships, at some point, whether it's 25 years or 30 years, the state then owns the assets. We will never, ever own this asset, having pumped in millions and 60% more this year, and God knows how much percent more next year, and we won't know. And you can't give a deadline because you cannot predict what that market is going to do. And this goes to the root of the problem. You've made a bags of it, not because you're Dennis Naughton, not because you're Fine Gael, not because you're Fianna Fáil, but the whole 9 yards of you believe in the neoliberal model that just does not work for delivering this kind of service.